I feel greatly honored to be invited by the Benue sons and daughters to be part of this peaceful march and address the nation/world here in Abuja, the capital of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Given the recent ugly developments in Adamawa, Kaduna, Taraba, and very recently in Benue State, and the persistence of violence in our country, this gathering resonates with the challenges we face as a country in making responsible moral choices in the perilous and trying times in which we live, with ever-spiraling cycles of sectarian violence. On a day such as this, we need to tell one another a thing or two. We need to look the other person in the face and say what we feel inside. I feel some furious anger, some hot anger inside me. Yes, we need to be outraged by events happening in our country, or else we will descend into total anarchy with our pious or meaningless hypocrisy of political correctness. As I thank you for giving me this privileged opportunity to share some thoughts with you at this trying moment in the Benue Valley, I bring you best wishes of the government and people of Benue State. It is seemingly impossible to maintain one's equilibrium after witnessing the massacre of innocent and defenseless people in the face of harsh economic conditions. However, our role as God's ministers is that of inspiring hope if we as a people accept responsibility for the situation in our country as divine chastisement. The pain is much, and the wounds will take time to heal. But without faith, we cannot please God. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 6 to 17. And this faith must be practical, James 2, 18. As leaders, the challenge we face demands that we take practical steps of faith to heal and restore the hope of the people. As leaders, we must demonstrate the required tenacity to remove the national humiliation from our citizens whose dignity and rights have been abused. The Nigerian situation. Let me begin by agreeing on one thing. No one with any knowledge of the matter can underestimate the importance of this issue. According to Dennis Hurley, a British politician, he said, history can be a dangerous guide, he argues, but it is practically the only useful guide we have. It is a far better guide than ideology, on which people otherwise tend to rely in interpreting the present and guessing about the future. But if you use history as a guide, you must examine the differences from the past as well as the similarities. For a long time in the history of our country, we have been famous for trying our best to maintain the unity of our country through political and religious correctness. I happen to be a son of a peasant farmer who was also an astute politician, a community leader, and God-fearing church leader. I must acknowledge that I have the privilege of enjoying the two sides of life, the rural and the urban. These are two ways of hot anger and correctness. When the correctness does not work, you apply the hot anger by calling things by their names. This is what I learned from my father. For a country that has known different types of violence ranging from civil war, which came up at the dawn of our independence, to armed robbery, kidnapping, ethnic crisis, religious clashes, political killings orchestrated by political thuggery, Niger Delta militancy, to other forms of violence, herdsmen, terrorists, Boko Haram, etc., which have brought a new and similar dimensions to our experience of violence in Nigeria. According to Bishop Lucius Ugoji, its members these terrorists. These members combine the murderous suicide attacks of terrorists, tactics of terrorists, with guerrilla modes of operation, accompanied by virulent attacks. With impunity, they kill and maim innocent people indiscriminately. The unspeakable evil made vivid in the horrific images of human beings butchered like animals instills fear and trembling, traumatizes the populace, and fuels a culture of violence which often leaves or affects the psyche of young Nigerians. This is not just murder, which displeases God, but this is genocide, what is happening in Benue. When women, even pregnant women and children, are gruesomely murdered, then the attacks become genocidal. And this is precisely what is happening. The Christian church totally condemns any assault, directly or indirectly, on any human life, be it Tiv, Idoma, Fulani, or any tribe, as this is a direct transgression against God and humanity. Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI points out that those who kill by acts of terrorism actually despair of humanity, of life, of the future. In their view, everything is to be hated and destroyed. When terrorist organizations attack defenseless and unsuspecting people, they show clearly the death wish which fills them. Terrorism is built on contempt for life. For this reason, not only does it commit intolerable crimes, but becomes its resource. Because it resorts to terror, it is itself a true crime against humanity. I call on the federal government led by President Buhari and to deal decisively with these attacks. The reverberation of these attacks in different parts of the country, with the latest in Benue, only spells out one thing: division. This situation, if not carefully and swiftly handled, is capable of degenerating into a war situation. When those who are attacked feel not sufficiently defended by those who have sworn an oath to defend them, then the only option left is the right to self-defense. This will simply bring about proliferation of arms, and that becomes chaotic for a nation like Nigeria. The insufficient actions and at times inaction, what I consider conspiracy of silence, only point to a nod or an encouraging body language to the perpetrators of these attacks. I call on the United Nations, the European Union, and indeed the entire international community to come to the aid of the Tiv Nation and the Benue people and the other peoples who are facing the similar attacks in the magnitude of a genocide. Let me warn that the population of Nigeria is too big to manage a refugee situation. A stitch in time, they say, saves 9. Let me share this story with you.
Father,
part of what I look at or consider what our country has been going through. There was a story of a fire outbreak in a 3-story building in a particular village. The fire started from the ground floor and was moving up. People were jumping out. All the inmates of the house were jumping out. Right at the topmost, there was a woman who was nursing a baby of about a month or 2 months. And the fire was coming up. Every place was becoming very dangerous for her. She could run without the baby, but she didn't want to leave the baby behind. And people were shouting from outside, "Throw the baby down, we'll catch the baby for you." And she would not. So they went about looking for a particular goalkeeper in the village who was very famous for goalkeeping. And when they succeeded in getting him, they brought the man. They said, "Please help us rescue the baby of this woman." And they told the woman, "Madam, throw your child down." When the woman saw the goalkeeper, she laughed, believing and trusting that now the baby will be in safe hands. She threw the baby and the goalkeeper caught the baby. Everybody clapped and was happy. In the euphoria, the goalkeeper thought that he was in the football pitch and they kicked the baby back into the fire. That is what is happening in Nigeria. We welcome our leaders with great and high expectations and high hopes But when they come, they take us back to the oblivion. At this juncture, I would like to briefly furnish you with some facts and figures regarding the refugee situation currently in Benue with the researched violence of 1st January 2018 record in Logo and Guma local governments. It is officially stated that over 73 persons, women, men, and children were slain, although local sources put the figure at about 100, whose corpses were recovered. The method of killing and degrading treatment given to women and children, ranging from body parts harvesting, beheading, torture, rape, strangulation, infanticide, among others, recorded, can only be likened to genocidal activities like that of Rwanda in 1994, as well as those of ISIS in Syria and Iraq. The conflict has reduced the human rights profile of the communities, as over 100,000 have been displaced from Bagbe up to Turan and other council wards. Currently, ad hoc shelters are being built as follows. Ad hoc IDP camps, Logo local government. UBE Center, Uba, 1,760 inmates. RCM Primary School, Ni, 341. LG School, Abeda, 1,507. NKC Secondary School, Abeda, 234. Aship Polytechnic, Anyi, 5,478. NKC Anyi, 12,468. Local Government School, Bajimba, 6,829. St. Francis Church, Daudu, 5,456. UNHCR Shelter Daudu, 4,300. Local LGE School, Tokula, 3,684. Total population put at 42,067 inmates. The data above may, however, be far below actually displaced persons, as many households sampled reported that more than half of displaced persons were living with relations rather than camps. Perceived populations of IDPs is placed at 140,000 in Logo and 93 in Goma. Terrorism. Terrorism is the institutional violence of fundamentalists. The word terrorism is practically and emotionally charged, and this greatly compounds the difficulty of providing a precise definition. According to Bishop Ugoji, since one man's terrorist is another's freedom fighter, there is no generally acceptable definition of the term. However, common definitions of terrorism refer to those violent acts perpetrated for a religious, political, or ideological goal that are intended to create fear, terror, and which deliberately target or disregard the safety of civilians. Terrorists can come from any social, political, or religious groups. It is very common among religious terrorists to hear rhetoric about pure evil or Satan. By characterizing their perceived enemies as satanic, they tend to justify hatred and even mass slaughter. Herdsmen terrorists, what we are facing currently in Benue and by large the Middle Belt. Things have been moving so fast that in this country it is very difficult to keep up with them. The future of Nigeria is now impossible to predict. In fact, you can say that if you are not confused, you do not know what is going on. It is like pressing the fast rewind button on a video recorder and wondering whether it will stop in 1960 to 97, in the 1967 to 70s during the Civil War, in 1980s to the 1990s, days of the military era, or when will it stop? Certainly, I think anybody with a sense of history must reflect on the lessons of the past and not on ideologies. And if we do a good reflection, we will start by asking the right questions. Hence, according to Dennis Hurley, the moment you have got the question rightly formulated, the possibility of a solution is imminent. Our duty now is to define that question and to start working out the answer. The simple question is, when has the Fulani herdsmen started carrying sophisticated weapons, AK-47, and not a staff, as is typical of shepherds or pastoralists or nomads. This is a characteristic feature of shepherds as contained in Psalm 23, verses 1 and 4. With your crook and your staff, you lead them to greater pastures, and not with AK-47 or revolver or pump-action guns. Thus, we classify this group of herdsmen as terrorists. They are out for ethnic cleansing, going by their modes of operations, and there is no other word to describe it better than to say what is happening is genocide. In my estimation, this is not something that should be taken for granted by anybody. We cannot remain silent in the face of this gruesome murder massacre of the Benue people. Worse, by government leaders are inadequate when confronted with the absolute immorality and senselessness of the murder of these people. We look for rational understanding of something that is beyond human comprehension. We seek definitive answers. We demand that action and proactive action be taken now to bring those involved to judgment and stop further bloodshed. The style of killings left no one in doubt that it was a manifestation of absolute evil. According to Gerhard Schroeder, German Chancellor, 1998 to 2006, talking about the Holocaust, on 25th January 2015 in Berlin, he has this to say: evil is not a political or scientific category, but after the Holocaust, we could doubt that it exists. We can't doubt that it exists. And what it manifested itself in the hate-driven genocide carried out by the Nazi regime. This fact does not permit us to circumvent our responsibility by blaming everything on a demonic Hitler. The evil manifested in the Nazi ideology was not without its precursors. There was a tradition behind the rise of this brutal ideology and the accompanying loss of moral inhibition. Above all, it needs to be said that the Nazi ideology was something that people supported at the time and that they took time in putting it into effect. What is happening in Nigeria is a grand plan that has been orchestrated and is being unleashed on innocent citizens. If one would ask, who owns these herds of cattle? Is it the Fulani in the bush or those in political offices? Who buys these weapons for them? And why are they carrying about unlicensed weapons? It is easy to know why the leaders of our country are keeping quiet, looking on as the destruction lasts. The past cannot be overcome. It is the past, but its traces and above all, the lessons to be learned from it extend to the present. There will never be anything that can make up for the horror, the torment, and the agony that took place in Guma and local governments area of Benue State on the early hours of 1st January 2018. It is only possible to provide the families of those who died and the survivors a certain amount of compensation. It is true, the temptation to forget is very great, because many of us are perhaps interested in making statements that are politically correct and not facing the reality of the injustice and the destruction of human dignity by the herdsmen, possibly based on their ideologies. At this point, it is good for our leaders to know that the United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of Crime of Genocide was a direct effect on the Holocaust and international law. It requires people of different cultural, religious, and racial origins to respect and protect life and human dignity throughout the world. The convention was framed by the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland in December 1948 and came into force in January 1951. This law is binding on Nigeria as a member state under the United Nations. And so we demand that the perpetrators of this genocide in Benue and other parts of the country be brought to face the law. Let these killings by the herdsmen terrorists be remembered for a purpose. Remembrance of the sad event of the killings by the herdsmen terrorists and where it has happened in this country is an essential component in fashioning the future. The speech this evening in the National Ecumenical Centre does not limit itself to lamentations over human wickedness, nor to dwelling on the message of hope in adversity provided by Psalm 2, a sacred text for all religions. Psalm 31. By the ways of this psalm, we know that faith can be applied practically to forestall the evils perpetrated under a godless ideology. These words of the ancient psalm rise from our hearts. I have become like a broken vessel. I hear the whispering of many terror on every side as they scheme together against me, as they plot to take my life. But I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. Using the words of St. Pope John Paul II in his address to the Jews in Jerusalem on the 23rd of March, year 2000. He says, we can overcome by the echo of the heart-rending laments of so many, men, women, the aged, children, infants. Cry out to us from the depths of the horror that they experience. How can we fail to heed their cry? No one can forget or ignore what happened. No one can diminish its scale. We wish to remember those, our brothers and sisters, our children and women and our parents. We wish to remember them for a purpose, namely to ensure that never will evil prevail. How could man have such utter contempt for man? Because he had reached the point of contempt for God. Only a godless ideology could plan and carry out the type of disgraceful killings of fellow human beings. But amidst all this pain which we are going through now, we believe and trust in God and our Lord Jesus and recognize that not even in the darkest hour is the light extinguished. Thus, the entire Bible, though well aware of the human capacity for evil, also proclaims that evil will not have the last word. Out of the depths of pain and sorrow, the believer's heart cries out, I trust in you, O Lord. I say, you are my God. In you, O Lord, I have taken refuge. Deliver me in your righteousness. Psalm 31. As a Christian and a Catholic, my religion teaches me and my spiritual experience demands that we overcome evil with good. We remember, but not with the desire for vengeance or as an incentive for hatred. For us to remember is to pray for peace and justice for all. Recommendations. Pope John Paul II admonished us on the need for peace in these words. Do not be afraid to take a change on peace, to live peace. Peace will be the last word of history. Social justice cannot be attained by violence. Violence kills what it intends to create. And in the words of Nelson Mandela, the sight of freedom looming on the horizon should encourage us to redouble our efforts at promoting peace. Dear friends in Christ, Albert Einstein once said, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. It is my hope that our efforts here tonight will be able to yield the desired results as we continue to work towards bandaging the wounds of our people and giving them hope. Together with you this evening, I bow my head before the victims of the crisis, whose 75 corpses we buried on the 11th day of January 2018 in Makurdi. Even if one day the names of these victims should fade in the memory of mankind, their fate will not be forgotten. They will remain in the heart of history. God bless you all.
Ngulaka liam manimhem ba Bishop Wilfred. Na siza ne hem no were ne san shon gba na ase wasaku she cave ya yose kenta wasiti shen kenta wase Nigeria chi. Nso ne sa shi ogene. Negative Catholic Link Internet Radio.